Well, thanks for coming, everybody. This evening, we're going to talk about hurricane preparedness and recovery tips for your landscape. We appreciate everybody registering and signing up. We have lots of classes coming up, so hopefully you find more that you're interested in. My name is Ann Yasalanis. I'm the Residential Horticulture Extension Agent and Master Gardener Coordinator with IFAS Extension in Polk County. So today what we're going to talk about is how to assess your landscape prior to the start of hurricane season. So we're a few days late, but I think we're still okay. We're going to learn how to prepare your landscape for an approaching storm, and then finally talk about if there's things that happen after a storm in your landscape, what we can do about them. So we are in hurricane season now, and we're going to talk about what you can do to minimize damage in your landscape by having a plan in place and being prepared. So when a storm approaches, you'll be ready and you can focus on other preparations, safety of your family, those sorts of things, instead of the last minute type of panic that sometimes sets in when people start looking at things that could fly around their yard. So some of the things we're going to talk about will be long-term plans like tree care, and then some other things will be things to do as the storm approaches. So we'll have things that would be, months in advance, years in advance, weeks in advance, days in advance. And we'll go through that as we're talking. So hopefully by utilizing our recommendations, your landscape will be able to weather any type of storm. So preparation is really important. And I have a list of things here that we'll be talking about, and really rushing to do these things in the days leading up to a storm is really not advised. So you know that counties and states send out, hurricane prep guides. We're always talking about preparations and those sorts of things. And people think about buying batteries and securing, sandbags or things that they might need, but it's also really important to prep your landscape as we move forward too. So we'll talk about how to assess your landscape, maintenance, some replacement and repairs that could take place, drainage issues, hazards in the landscapes, all sorts of things. So one of the most important things you can do for hurricane preparedness is to take an assessment of your landscape. And you can really do this any time of year. You can do it before the start of hurricane season, but you really don't have to. So early spring, if you can get on a schedule to kind of do this would be, really helpful. So what you'll need is a camera. So your phone is fine, obviously, a notepad, pencil, and then really just making sure you have allowed enough time to do a thorough assessment of your landscape. So during your pre-storm assessment, it's really important that you walk your entire property and consider all issues related to flooding, erosion, any wind damage, wind that could come from multiple directions, potential impact of tree failure or other things. And so that you can make all of these notes and be prepared when a storm comes. So again, this is something we're doing early. You'll want to use your camera to document things, photos of trees and structures. So it could be arbors, screen enclosures, pools, patios, your roof, your trees, all of those things. And that'll help you make repairs later. It may also help with insurance if needed. And, you can check your policy and see how that fares as well. So, if you're out there taking pictures of your trees, you may as well take pictures of your roof as well. And then you'll be really prepared to have that. Also, if you have a lot of potted plants or things that are outside that would have to be removed or relocated before a storm would occur, the photos that you're taking pre-storm might help you remember where everything goes. If you've got a lot of that, it will make it a lot easier when it's time to put everything back. And you can use those photos and an assessment to create a checklist of things maybe you want to do weeks or months before a storm, and then some things that you'll be able to do right as a storm approaches. So this should take a little bit of time, again, to do a thorough assessment. So one of the things what we want to look at when we do our assessment is the impact that water could have on your landscape. during a storm. And you may get impacts just from rain events. So even more water on top of that could be an issue. So as you walk through, identify areas that might be prone to flooding, erosion, and determine if maybe there's any changes you can make prior to hurricane season that could offset those things. So you can see our checklist here of things to do before a storm. So lower level in the pool, you might be doing that a couple of days before, but some of these other things you could do weeks before. So cleaning out any grates or catch basins that you might have in the landscape, cleaning out gutters taking out the leaves and debris and things like that, so that water can flow freely. You don't want to be, trying to unclog a gutter during a storm if there's an issue, and really that's something we should be doing every spring anyway. And if you're prone to flooding or erosion, maybe we can think of things that we can do, such as drainage lines, additional swales, rocks and stones to direct water and help with all of that. Wind is another thing that may impact your landscape during a storm, and different strengths of wind can have different impacts, as well as different wind directions as well. So we want to know what impact wind could have in our landscape. And so what can you do? Prior to the storm, you can assess all your outdoor structures. That's what we're doing here, and determine if they could be anchored or braced to the ground. Do they need to be secured in cement or something like that? Or do they need to be taken down and moved to a safe location during a storm event? We know that our outdoor, lawn ornaments and potted plants and smaller things like that really should be removed and stored. But do these larger things need to be moved also? And then you need to determine, where are you going to store these things? Do you have room in your garage, or is it, full of cars and all your potted plants, and now you feel like you need to move your arbor and there's nowhere to put it? So maybe have a plan to where all of that stuff is going to go also, so that it's easy and you're not, panicking last minute. So we talked about wind and we talked about water. One of the big concerns that often come up when we look at hurricane season and high winds are trees. They're always a very big concern during a storm event. But trees are one of our greatest landscape assets. So we want to really do what we can to encourage healthy, strong trees that can withstand hurricane force, storm force winds. So the main thing to remember with that is our proper selection, planting, and pruning throughout that life of the tree will really, really help it out. And we have a lot of research on that from the university as well that I'll refer to at the end of the webinar. So the time to prune is not when a storm is approaching. We want to prune for structure and strength when that tree is young. But if you have existing trees in your landscape that you haven't raised from a young tree, we can help you figure out what can be done there. So the top 3 things that will make a strong tree will be that selection, the good quality tree, healthy plant, wind resistant species that I'll show you in a minute here, proper planting, and then proper pruning as your trees are young. And I have here a link to finding a certified arborist for any pruning that could be done or should be done on a tree. And it is important to get multiple quotes on any type of tree service, and you can see the things listed there that are really important to make note of if you're looking for a company to do any type of tree service in your landscape. So you can use this list, and this can be found online, and again we'll send this reference to you to determine what trees that you might want to add to your landscape, and if you're going through doing your assessment, are any of these trees in your yard that you maybe want to remove? Specifically if they're near a home or something like that, do you want to take those out, or just note that they are not as wind resistant as others, and there could be an issue. So after you select a tree that's on our recommended list, we want to again choose a tree based on right plant, right place for our soil and drainage and all of those things. We want to make sure it is properly planted from the beginning, following all of our instructions. And we did a quick 15-minute webinar a few weeks ago on proper planting that you can watch on YouTube, and it shows you all how to properly plant. But really, issues with roots and soil that surround a tree, even if it's really an older tree, they can impact a tree years down the road. So be mindful of that if a tree fails, it could be something that happened, 20 years ago when it's planted. Those tree issues aren't always noticed right away. And consider planting them in groups if you're looking to do any replacement or anything like that in your landscape prior to hurricane season. So pruning, that's a big thing. It's its own multiple hour workshop, but we do have a lot of information on pruning, and I'll give you a link on that as well. But the important thing to remember is we don't want to be doing drastic pruning prior to a storm heading our way. And these are just a very few notes of, many things when we talk about pruning. So some of the main things that could cause issue, tree failure, in high wind situations would be codominant stems, included bark, and unbalanced canopy. And I'll show you what those look like. So these are some of the structural issues that may be a problem in your trees. And again, these could have been prevented if properly pruned from a young age. So if you look at the picture on the left, it shows a cluster of branches, and it could have been avoided if proper structural pruning earlier in the tree's life was done. But now that it's like that, nutrients and water don't actually reach those middle branches there. And eventually those branches will die back and could break really easily during high winds. And in the photo on the right, you can see that there's two large central leaders, and those central leader is the main branch that goes straight up and down in the middle of a tree. There should be one of those. And if it was pruned to one leader when the tree was young, it would reduce issues of breakage later on. So you may be able to remedy some of these things in small trees that you have now. Another structural issue that may cause a problem is an unbalanced canopy. The photo on the left shows what's called lion's tailing. Probably everyone has seen that. And the reason it's called lion's tailing is because so much of the interior foliage was removed that all that weight is now at the ends of the branches. And so those branches are very heavy now, and it's not good for wind resistance. And the photo on the right shows improper thinning. Thinning is something that can be done, but not like the photo on the left there. Too much foliage was removed from that tree, about 40% of the foliage, when state standards for tree pruning say that no more than 25% should be removed at one time. So over time, what will happen is it will begin to droop like the other photo. Small sprouts could start at the interior of the plant, and that would be causing weakness and reducing wind resistance. So don't let anybody, or you yourself, don't over thin a tree. This is what's often done to trees right before a storm. And this is what's sold as hurricane pruning. So that's why it's really important that you're selecting someone to prune your trees that is a certified arborist and doesn't remove all of this from your tree. So what about palms? These are often a problem as well. So we can see here that over pruning is a problem, and it can lead to stress. So this photo on the left here shows an over pruned palm. I know it may be hard to tell because many times palms are over pruned. So those over pruned palms sustained more damage during a hurricane than properly pruned palms. And research has shown that severely pruning a palm does not mean it will be needing less pruning over time. And research also shows that over pruning a palm makes them more likely to be damaged during a hurricane. So you can see in that sketch there the acceptable amount to prune if pruning needs to be done at all. And so research also showed that from past hurricanes that Washington palms tend to break during high wind. Queen palms tend to fall over. The royal palms tend to lose foliage, and the cabbage and phoenix palms do pretty well and withstand those high wind situations. So if that's something you're selecting for, you know, it's really important to think about that. There's a lot of takeaways from research that was done after previous storms, and many of them, you know, there was lists and lists of those things, but I thought these were really interesting takeaways, and I thought I'd pull them out for you as well, because you might not be aware of some of this, you know, things that are affecting trees. And so construction activities within 20 feet of the trunk cause trees to blow over a decade later. So that goes right back to, you know, the planting from the very beginning. So how would you even know that if you weren't the original owner of the tree and the house and those sorts of things? Root defects such as girdling roots, which happens when we add way too much mulch around the base of a tree, can cause trees to blow over. So we talk a lot about proper mulching. And the girdling roots are the little roots that come out at the top, kind of right above the tree flare, the root flare, and kind of start to circle the tree there. Neighborhoods with the most tree cover had least amount of damage and debris. I thought that was really interesting. Trees in groups blow down less frequently than single trees. Also thought that was really interesting. Large pruning cuts create decay and cracks that lead to breakage in storms. And there's lots and lots of photos from past storms where this is definitely true. Topped trees break over. So that a topped tree would be when they just kind of cut the top off of a tree, basically, or cut the ends off of branches instead of going back to what would be like a lateral branch or something like that. And overpruned palms can increase their susceptibility to storms too, which we just talked about a minute ago. And then recently cleared lots were susceptible to tree damage as well. So you can think about that. A recently cleared lot, there used to be a lot of trees. Now there's less. They're not as protected together in a group that they were, and you can see how those, you know, that would cause damage, which is interesting for, you know, a newer home that maybe some trees were spared, but those trees used to be, instead of 1 or 2, there were, you know, 6 or 8 in that area. And then remember to identify anything that could be a hazard if it fell on your home, on power lines, or any type of utility. So in the photo on the left, you could identify any branches that could damage power lines. And on the right, you can see trees that maybe had disease or rot would be more susceptible to breaking. And I have some photos at the end of some trees that did that in someone's yard. And that's not always something you can identify, but it is a reason that a tree would break. You can see that there. So then after the storm, we've done our assessments, we've moved everything, we've done all that we can, and that's great. You know, hopefully we have a great plan. But when we go back out again after a storm has passed, there's some things that we need to refer to on that assessment that we took, and really be cautious when we head out as well. So when it is safe, you can go out in your landscape again with your assessment. You've got your photos, so you should be pretty organized and, you know, kind of have a feeling of, I felt like this tree was rotten on the inside, and it was because a branch fell, or, you know, I knew this tree would be great, I've always pruned it properly. You probably will have a pretty good idea about that because you have walked around your landscape. But be really careful of any down power lines, and you can use your pre-storm assessment to help you when you're going out. And then we always recommend that if you're going to use any type of landscape equipment, chainsaws in particular, that you are trained and wearing your proper personal protective equipment when you go out. So when you go back out after the storm, make those assessments. If you had to stake anything, brace anything, you can remove all that. We don't want to leave any braces or, you know, twine or wire or anything around trees for any longer than necessary. Remove damaged plants, pick up debris, prune back anything that's broken, and you can get some assistance online. We have lots of information on if you have a branch that is broken, how should you properly prune that back so that you have a wound that will heal and, you know, not create another weak branch for future issues. Any of that stuff that you had to bring inside or in the garage or anything like that, you've got your photos, you know exactly where everything is going to go back. And then any standing water that maybe is lying around, you want to go through and dump anything out that was standing to reduce any mosquito breeding. Now you probably brought most everything in, but remember our mosquitoes only need about a tablespoon of water to breed. So we want to go through and make sure everything's dumped out as best we can. So the survival of your damaged trees after a hurricane kind of depend on the size and the age of that tree. The small newly planted trees, if they're uprooted or leaning, you know, they can be easily replanted and staked. Larger trees will most likely need to be removed if they're, you know, severely damaged. If large limbs were lost or there were a lot of wounds from breakage, the tree may need to be removed. And really that would be a good time to reassess that tree and determine if it's worth saving or if it should be removed. It could cause problems in future storms. And maybe this would be a time to replace it with a more desirable species, or even, you know, if it's way too close to the house, you know, okay, well, I've always been worried about this tree. It's got a lot of damage. Now's the time to take it out, and I'll replant further away from the house, or I'll replant further away from the house and I'll plant, you know, 3 trees instead or something like that. Palms after the storm, really important to leave any fronds with green on them so that they can properly recover. So that green on plant leaves, that's where they get their energy. So we want to make sure that those palms have enough energy to recover. So we want to leave any fronds until they turn totally brown. If they're leaning, they could be removed. Again, if it's a brand new palm, it could probably be restaked. So do you need to redesign? What happened in your landscape? If your storm, if the storm took a lot of tree cover away, you might be left with something that looks very different than what you had before. And that's not always a bad thing. I mean, it's always hard to lose trees and lose large limbs. But it is an opportunity to maybe replace some of those. It is hard to take out any type of tree, even if it is, you know, something that's not wind resistant. It feels kind of strange to just take a tree out for no reason, but maybe a storm, you know, damaged it enough that, okay, now I feel like I'm ready to remove this, you know, really susceptible to tree species, and I can replace it with something else. So you may have a totally different yard and would need to then look at something else. And what do you do now? So we have a master gardener that had that very same thing happen. I believe she's in the webinar, so if she has comments, she can make them. But she had issues prior to Hurricane Irma in 2017. You can see that large tree there. It's in the middle of the yard. You can kind of see, well, you can really see in that top left picture, but kind of in the right picture as well, that it had a pretty big wound in it. And she decided to take out that tree, and I believe another one as well prior to Irma. And with that very large wound in it, you can see those limbs hanging over the house. So, you know, that's a tough decision to make. That's a big tree, but also that if that would have fallen on the house, that would have pretty well taken out most of that house as well. So again, she took those out. You can see the before, and then the bottom left picture is after the trees were removed there. And so she spent the last couple years replanting this, I mean, totally different landscape at this point. Something that was full shade is now full sun. And so she has worked to re-landscape it. She has lots of native plants. She's counting birds and bees and butterflies and all sorts of things like that now. So while she does have a totally different landscape, I think even though that she feels like, oh, well, I had to take out trees, you know, that's, you know, not a great feeling, but by replanting, we've brought in wildlife and, you know, flowers and blooms and other things as well. So I'll show you a picture of her before and after. So there's that before look, right when those trees came out. So, you know, this was a lawn and landscape that were in pretty well full shade, and that's a very big shock to a landscape. I would pretty well guess it would just start to look worse over time unless something was done. And usually many plants would have to be replaced if you went to that extreme, if you've ever taken down any trees or anything before. So there's her after landscape as well. So very different looking, very different plants, obviously, that you would be putting in. And we do have landscape design classes coming up if you want to learn more. But we can always help if you have, you know, changes like that occurring in the landscape. So to kind of recap what we talked about today, tree care, again, very important, starting when a tree is young, pruning it properly, again, planting properly, right selection, not getting a tree pruned, hurricane pruning before a storm, really refrain from doing that. I would say any pruning before a storm that would need to be done would be things that you're, you know, I'm worried about this branch falling onto my house or something like that. But we don't want to be doing any hurricane pruning of any trees or palms in our landscape. And that pre-storm assessment will really help you in preparation and help you feel a little bit more comfortable going into hurricane season so that you know what's going on. Also, you can consider anything now that you're kind of worried about, replacing those trees with the more high wind resistant trees. The list I had in the PowerPoint was short. There are a few more on our websites as well. So there's a pretty good selection that you can choose from. And you probably have a lot of them in the landscape already anyways. And then just being careful as you clean up after a storm. I did mention we have a lot of resources. There was a lot of research that was done on trees and palms after hurricanes. In fact, there's some interesting research they did for wind resistance in trees, just blowing. They had a big blower of some sort that they were blowing different speeds of wind at, and have done research on that as well. So there's lots and lots of information, and I thought these were some of the best resources to pull for a homeowner. And then we always want to refer people to our Florida Friendly Landscaping Guide to Plant Selection and Landscape Design. And that's where you can pull lists of plants if, you know, you've gone from shade to sun, or you need to select a new tree or something like that. And we do have lots of workshops coming up